So, thank you for being here and welcome. I'm Diane Boyd. I'm the director of the Video Center for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning. And today's offering, Cognitive Tools for Improving Learning, fits within the scholarly teaching approach track of professional development seminars. And you can read the goals there. I will not read them to you, but they're basic. We're going to explore some cognitive science and think about how we might be able to translate it into our practice in and beyond the classroom with our students. And if you have a family, maybe with your children or even with yourself, right? So those are the goals for today. And let's start with a sort of abstract question. Is teaching an art or a science? So just think about it for a second. Is teaching an art or a science?
Probably both.
Pardon?
Probably both. Art as well as science.
Yes. But think about it more. I mean, just think about it. If we think of teaching as an art, what do we know about it? And if we think about teaching as a science, what do we know about it? Okay, so let's open the floor for a quick discussion. Art or science?
Yes.
Yes, okay, excellent, thank you. Yes, it is. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I'll state the obvious. There's an art side to it, but there's definitely a science side as well.
What is the art of teaching for you?
It's the way we present, it's how we present ourselves and how we deliver what we know. So that's more like an art, communication.
It's an art of performance.
Okay, good, thank you. Rajesh and Leslie, I'm going to try to use your names, so of those that I know your names by heart, so that you'll get a sense of who each other is. What else about art and science?
I think it's an art because of the interactiveness of teaching and the way things change. You're not expecting it sometimes to change the way it does within a class session, so you have to go with what's happening, and there's impromptu things that are happening.
Right, improvise.
Yeah, it feels artsy.
Thank you, Jamie. Sometimes as you were talking, I got a visual of Jackson Pollock. Have you ever seen that movie, Pollock, where he's painting and he has these huge canvases and he's just going crazy with the paint? You know what I mean? Like sometimes it feels like that when we're in class, right? It's just a little bit out of whack or out of control, a little unwieldy. And yet, when the dust clears at the end of the class, there can be a strong sense that students are going away with real learning. and we'll learn later that if they sleep in between then and the next time they use the learning, they have a better chance of consolidating the memory and actually remembering it.
I think some sort of things that we ask, say it's art or science, like the Institute of Education Sciences, they like to do experimental studies, so we can actually link outcomes to whatever you do in the classroom. So if you implement a pedagogical approach, you want to see how does it increase or enhance or affect development, which is student learning outcomes, student achievement. So they would never, in terms of being an art, they won't necessarily take that.
Yes. Yes, please.
I'm also was thinking like art can be found in the type of relationship you develop with your student or your audience, whether it's during your teaching or afterwards, or even for a lifelong.
I'm going to capture some of these words so we have them for later, but
Another art is the disposition that you have as the designated leader of the class. There can be all kinds of postures from the front of the room, right?
It's also a science because it's psychological. You're dealing with psychology.
Right.
Well, depending on your university, might be cast by the learners.
Right. Isn't that science? Yeah, we'll go with science, yeah. But you're all here today. I don't know what brought you here, but I'm wondering if it's the word science, right? Cognitive science, cognitive tools for learning. I guess science wasn't in the title, but the science part of it is thinking about what works some of the art of what we'll achieve today is translating it back into our own practice. Any other final comments about this before we delve into a visual? Yes.
I think it's more of a science. Of course, I agree that it is an art, but science in a way because we follow particular methods of teaching. So in that way, it's we follow a very scientific approach by teaching.
Yeah. Hello, welcome. Come on in. There's a couple of
On the
seats.
art side, though, it shows flexibility that art shows, because unlike in science, your results are not always going to be the same in each classroom experiment, so to speak.
Right.
Like, you're focused on outcomes, but it's not always going to work
Right.
in an environment. So
Right.
it entails flexibility, like in the arts.
Right, so it's almost like flexibility is across both of them in this interesting way.
Yes, Heather. When you first posed the question, I'm still a new professional, and my first thought was, well, I like the science because with the science, I can learn that. The art that you're describing seems to be based on a lot of experiences, right? Like, how do you develop this teaching persona? How do you develop your relationship with students? Seems very experiential based, and I don't have that, and I'm going to need years in order to gain that. So my first thought was, let's learn the science first, because then I can go forth and apply what I learned. So I was instantly drawn to the sciences.
Yeah, but that brings us to another point, how we learn things. There are two ways of learning. Using right side of your brain or left side of your brain. Logical or rational, or rather we say rational way of learning things, or then the art side, which is like call it as the right side of learning things.
Yeah,
So you learn from both systems.
right. And I'm not saying you couldn't read a book or attend a lecture to learn how to interact with students and how to build those relationships, but it just seems that
When's
might
it
be
gonna
more.
stick?
Go ahead.
When's it gonna stick?
When's it gonna stick?
Right. Well, that's a lovely segue, and I did not plant Heather in the audience because one of the cognitive principles is that you have to practice, and distributed practice actually makes things stick. So there is experience is definitely part of it, but certainly bringing a mindful approach to your teaching from the get-go as a young teacher is going to give you a leg up on having meaningful interactions with your students and having their learning be amplified. So. Okay, so I'm gonna flash a graph at you. So, what do you see here? Let me tell you a little bit about one of the most famous cognitive science principles in learning and teaching is the idea of practice and testing. So this is a more recent publication about practice and testing, but the general idea, imagine that it's time, imagine your students studying for a test. And you go to class on Monday and you say, we're going to have a test in 2 weeks. When are they going to study for that test? Generally. The night before, right? So that is massed practice, right? They are cramming it all in right there in a very short time period. Whereas interleaved practice or distributed practice is a little bit of practice over time. So given that explanation, what do you see here? Massed is red, interleaved or distributed is yellow.
I'm not sure what practice performance means. I'm sorry, just like.
It means during the practice session. So this is building on old work, but I think it was published in 2013. So they set, we'll back off of the graph. The original test, the original experiment was a student reads a passage and then they take a test. Then a student reads a passage, they read it again, and they take a test. And then another student would read the passage, take the test, take the test, take the test. Right? And it wasn't the same test. Let's not get crazy about the experiment model, right? So what they found in that early experiment was that, who do you think did better? Reading more, testing once, reading once, testing more. Who did better?
Did the multiple testers?
The more times you test, the better you get, because that is technically distributed practice. So, but what this means is the practice is they're getting chances to practice. So if they practice over time in a non-test situation, it's not as effective as a massed practice session. But when it's time for the test, what happens?
They have
Right, they perform much better. Their accuracy is much better. So that's one of the cognitive principles that is harder for us to employ in higher ed, especially in hard sciences where we feel like we have to cover a lot of content and there's not that much time for practice. But I wanted to give you a look at that, and then we'll go. So are there any questions about that one principle? Because I'll hand out all of them to you now. You can take a look. Any questions about that one? So the hard thing for us is to be thinking about test, right? To us, tests are these painful things that must be graded, right? But in this body of work, test is just an example of time to practice again. So testing your knowledge, right? A famous article in Time a few years ago talked about the best ways to study, and one of them was self-testing. So rather than highlighting over and over again a text, you would create questions and quiz yourself. And students who did that did better than just reading over and over and over again, which makes sense. So here's a list of 6. Do we have enough? I'm hoping. I'm 8:30. Okay. So here's a list of 6 cognitive principles that we've pulled out of the literature. We're going to have a minute to do an interactive lit review in a second. But take a look at those 6. I'm not going to read them to you. So which of these cognitive principles did we roughly just talk about?
The fourth one.
Right, the fourth one. Best forms of retrieval practice are distributed over time and mixed. Right, good. So I want you to take a second to look at these. And then for practice, pick one of them and restate it. So there's some cognitive science behind that. We remember things better when we can attach them to the structures in our brain, and restating them helps us do that. Plus, the whole time we were talking about distributed practice, I never used any of those words. so try restating. Take a second. Does anyone need a pen? Do you have any feelings about which one of these 6 principles is the most intriguing or difficult?
I think emotional engagement for me, because we tend to think of people cognitive structures, especially if you come from a science background. We want to kind of differentiate the emotional aspects of learning from the cognitive aspect, because you can measure cognitive aspects, you can design an experiment to measure, to align, to infer the directional causality. When we do X and Y, it causes Z. So you're very certain. So we tend to shy away from emotion. So for me, I would like to say, especially when studying mathematics, how do students engage with mathematics? And what I do, I'm working with, I can design instruction to help them to alleviate anxiety, to get them more engaged, to if there are any issues in terms of I'm poor at math, I cannot do math, to change that agency, to change that self-concept.
Mm-hmm. How can you tell if your students are engaged?
Participation rates, that's one.
Yeah, that's definitely one.
Cognitive, we talk about one of these principles, how much cognitive effort do they put in? Are they doing the assignments you give them? Our percentage was how much they do. And in terms of the quality of the cognitive demand or cognitive richness, how much they put in themselves, they invest. One of the things that some people say they have office hours, and students don't come, that's another measure of engagement.
If they seek out supplemental instruction from the instructor. Yes, you were going to say something.
Body language.
Yeah, body language, absolutely. Right? Are they leaning in? Are they talking to each other? Do they stick around? Do they come early? Do they not have their cell phones? Right? So there's all kinds of different cues, but did anyone choose to try to rewrite that cognitive principle in their own words? Number 2. Did anyone try to rewrite number 2? Yeah, yeah. Well, we learn better if we're excited by the subject. And master learners figure out how to get excited about everything, or almost everything. So,
I think that's why I found number 6 to be a particularly attractive and useful one. The brain is attracted to novelty. So that's a way to, I think, just by the idea of attraction, right, to tap into emotion through originality.
and we see this all the time. I mean, video games are designed in very deliberate ways to produce a particular challenge that's just unreachable and excite people playing the game so much that they want to keep playing them, right? So the same sort of process. Okay, good. So here's some 6 guiding principles. What the bulk of our work together today will be is an interactive lit review. So I'll actually give you excerpts from some recent publications in cognitive science, and as a team, you'll quadruple up. In some cases, I think there'll be 5 of you in a group, and work through quickly, skimming the article. This is not a deep read. You're just going to take a look at the article and do 2 things. You're going to pull out the cognitive principle or principles you see at work, right? And you're going to think about ways you could use that in your teaching. So I'll write this on the board. Those are the verbal instructions. I'll write that on the board. And I'll also invite you, if you have a device, all of these are online. So you can just go to these bit.lys, depending on which group you're in, and access the articles there. So let me get a sense of pulling you guys together. There's 5 different articles. And there's 23 of you. This is, I can never do this math. So I think there'll be like 4 of you in a group and 1 group of 3. Okay. So I took some pages out. Some are easier than others to get through because they have lots of subheadings and bullets. Yay! And some of them even have graphs. So you 4 can work together. So here's the thing, I have 3 copies of each. So if I'm going to try to get somebody to have a device like I see you having last week. So this is good. So this group of 4 will work together. Yeah, that'd be great. And I can try to rustle up a device for one of you to use. There's 3 in there. So let me make sure I'm doing this right. It's okay. Yeah, we need to have a group of 5, maybe back over here. You guys will work together.
Yeah, we can share.
This one feels thick, but it's actually pretty easy to get through. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's great. So this is going to be a big group, and there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You guys work together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You guys work together. 5 people. So then 3 of them.
We have 5 people in the room.
And if you have a second, go ahead and introduce yourself to your people that you're working with. Okay, so here's the 2 things you're doing.
These are cases.
I'm Salor from Consumer Science, Consumer Design Science, and I'm a graduate teaching assistant.
My name is Amrut. I'm faculty with Consumer and Design Sciences Department.
Assistant professor in curriculum teaching. College education.
Which department?
Curriculum.
In Allison. So you are
So you
taking
will
graduate
have
level courses.
15 minutes for this task. Oh my God. So like.
You are taking very intense, learn something intense, then take
Or try to get a specific example of their so how you're doing. So this room is a little congested for a full-on gallery walk, but I've tried to structure things. Everyone but the Sousa, it's going to be hard to see. There's this really helpful chart that is in the Sousa reading that I recommend that you take a look at. Did you guys want a chance just to talk about what you were talking about, or anchor our understanding of what might be useful in this article? You can say no. You can say, yeah, pass.
Well, so what we've been doing is they have a structure for a lesson plan within the article, and they've been tied, and some of those you can see how they're tied into the 6 concepts that we were looking at. Maybe not exactly, but so this is a questions and then rationales. Questions to ask about setting up your lesson plan. And the idea with these, I think, is that if you ask yourself these questions, they're going to bring you back to how you can focus on those 6 concepts. And then it does list the rationale for why that occurs. We started, at the beginning we were associating some of the concepts with the different stages in the lesson plan, but that's probably a better outline, saying the author wrote it. So, yeah, that's the proof right there.
So, 2, how will I use humor in this lesson? I don't know if any of us deliberately think about that. I did have a professor in grad school who typed out his lecture notes, including the jokes. So I imagine that it's something that we think about, because both it helps build rapport, but it's also, there's an emotional attachment around humor, right? Which relates to the limbic system, and it adds novelty, right? So many of these things are related that it's fun to think about how we can use them. So, did you want to add anything about specific ways you use some parts of these?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that one up, because I specifically try to include humor within my lectures for this express goal of waking them up, right? Providing something that's new and novel, and the fact that the thought is, if you can get them like, oh, you're so engaging with me, or me is the focal point, I guess, as opposed to I think other things. The problem that I find, though, is you do that and it seems to fracture. It actually fractures the attention, which I find interesting. So it's a very thin line to walk, and it may be our program. Our students know each other very, very well, and so as soon as something happens, they like click off into their little groups, and they're kind of talking about how funny that was to each other, as opposed to engaging back. So I try to do that. It's for those purposes, but I'm not sure. It's a very, very fine line to walk, and I'm not sure I've hit it.
It can be tricky, and certainly you want to help them reset their attention span. There's some evidence in the literature that says that if you like stand up or change the activity every 7 to 10 minutes, it helps people reset. But you know, you're not a stand-up comedian either. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it can be difficult, especially if the cohort is so tightly knit.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in there, Sam?
One thing we added was that I think for the brain is the long-term retention. I think Susan talks about the working capacity of the brain. So I think based on the 6 cognitive principles you put earlier, the 2 things that are very relevant to that, and the other things that are relevant is meaning and retrieval practice. Retrieval practice helps you understand coherence in the short term. But for you to have on long-term transfer, you got to have meaning, so that you don't have to keep remembering. Because even if you do retrieval practice, once you're out of practice, you tend to lose that memory over time. But if you have meaning, if you understand why you did it, then over time you still retain the information. And if when you lose something, if there's degradation, all you need to do is a later refresher, and you get it all coming back because there's meaning for you and the subject or whatever lesson you did.
In some ways, I want to connect to this board over here. The idea of elaboration is related to that. But in elaboration, you're doing that for your brain yourself, right? So could someone in this group talk a little bit about meaning helps retention and what elaboration is? Because elaboration wasn't in all of the readings. So.
Yeah, you can talk.
Thank you, Jamie.
So the idea of practicing elaboration means to really it's the process of giving material new meaning by expressing it yourself. And so having students take a concept and think of another way to say it to somebody else, or even like turning and telling a partner something gives them a chance to think about it in a different way and hook onto it.
Right, exactly. Or drawing. There's
Doyle talks about the same thing. We haven't mentioned it yet, but he talks about connecting things so that helps you to retain it for a longer time and rewriting those things.
Right. So concept mapping is one strategy that you can use in any discipline to help your students connect ideas over time. Or a visual syllabus. Sometimes giving them a picture of how things will unfold is helpful. I'm trying to pick keywords because we haven't had a chance to go around. Like I just don't think it's going to work physically for us to be milling around in here. So let's think a second about transfer. Can you guys talk about, because I'm trying to pick out the ideas that weren't in every single one so that you can be thinking about how you could use them in your teaching. So transfer. What you got? Let someone be brave.
So transfer refers to taking previous knowledge or experience and being able to apply that to a new context, new situation. So this article talks about gauging students' current knowledge and then also assessing ways that they can apply previous knowledge and current knowledge to new situations that helps solidify the principles.
Thank you, Lucy. So you gave us sort of one way that it could be used. How do you find out what your students already know about something? Right, pretest, that's good, pretest.
We said pre-testing or discussions about what they know, or even something like games that are tests, but they don't see as tests.
Right. Sometimes in review sessions many moons ago, we would do Jeopardy, like I would make a Jeopardy game, and that would be how students would review for tests, which was fun. It would be even better if the students made the game themselves, because is it the 5th? What's the principle that's related to effort? Cognitive, which one is it? 3, right? So the heavy lifting, you want the heavy lifting of learning to be on them, because you can't do it for them. So, and effortful is gonna make it stick. Good. you guys have a lot of practical things over here. Do you want to highlight a few? Which one do you think this group needs to know the most?
Sleep.
Okay, let's talk about sleep then. Think about, tell us about sleep and then we'll ask some questions.
So Doyle talks about sleeping is needed before and after learning period. So before is to prep your brain to, absorb. And then after you learn, you want to also have quality sleep so that your learning content develops into long-term memory. And then, of course, in your learning period, you want relaxation. That could involve napping, I'm supposing. And we wrote down breaks and music. So, but that's mostly related to that sleep.
Yeah, but relaxation means it says, the article says about after intensive study, you need to relax so that brain has some time to digest what has learned.
Right.
So that's, in that sense, relaxation is more important.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, breaks, taking those breaks.
It's just like an exercise, interval training, right? You go hard for a minute and then you give yourself a rest, and you go hard for a minute, give yourself a rest. Can we imagine some about our students' sleep patterns? How much sleep have they gotten before a test? Not much, right? And then they're constantly getting tested in other classes beside yours. So basically, the period of 18 to 22 is probably the most sleep deprived of an average person's life if they're attending higher education classes. And it's also the time that they need the most sleep so that they can learn the best. So, I don't know how to fix that. But communicating with your students that setting up the class so that they have lots of time to practice before tests may help you convince them that spending that time sleeping rather than cramming is going to do better. Did y'all want to say something about that, or just, yes, agree, yes, yes.
I mean, I even do the same thing in English with, I don't test, you don't test.
Yeah.
Well, you can in Brit, but you don't in composition.
Yeah.
But like, I give them time to write in class, which hopefully means that they edit and get sleep and stuff like that.
Outside of class, right?
I kind of want to make a point because we kind of wrote sleeping next on our number 4 is caffeine and sugar. A lot of times when we don't have sleep, they don't want to eat, they don't have calorie, then just domino effect. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's maybe just reminding them to bring, we can't control the sleeping part, but reminding them to bring candy bar or if that's healthy.
Some snacks, yes.
Even having them in the classroom might help.
It would be even better if the students brought snacks to share. Even better, right? It's all like...
In some of our lab classes, we don't allow food and drinks.
Right,
so.
Right.
Some of the best classes I've been in, though, felt like book clubs because we got to eat and drink in the class, and people took turns signing up to bring snacks.
Right. I think that's a
Maybe
great
we should get
idea.
more.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Mm-hmm. It's a great idea. But especially, like, the other thing is not just in cognitive realms, in creating the community of the class. It's as a young teacher, I used to cart all kind of junk to eat and drink in class. But it's better if the students are so wanting to do it that they are inspired to do it for themselves, right? So as you can move along, if that's something you're interested in, having them take ownership of that is a good idea. Not just their learning, but the community in the class.
In that sense, actually, the practice they follow at the architecture studios, the studio culture is totally different. Like we always, almost 12 hours, that's our first goal, rather, I would say. And so everything is there, like our desktop and everything, like food and everything is all there, and it's a totally different culture. And I haven't experienced it in other disciplines or even other things, and that actually works very well.
Mm-hmm.
Studio culture, because it's like You have very close bonds with your colleagues and students. I think that kind of working, and there is always interaction with students, and students learn from each other and develop their projects based on the feedback.
What department is?
School of Architecture.
Okay.
Have you ever been out to the vet school for the first year? They have this beautiful, huge auditorium, and at every seat there's like a pillow and blanket and food and Kleenex and, right, because they have their spot, because they're in there from 8 until 5 every day, right? So they're just learning. It's just getting stuffed into their head, right? So,
Sounds like a Google workplace, like Google.
oh yeah, Google.
But also in masters in computer science, our labs would have a place you could sleep, like a sleeping bag, there's a kitchen there. So you knew you could program, guys like to program all night sometimes, so do gaming and get, race each other. But they knew they could crush theirs, their personal space. But I think the main thing, at least here with the D'Souza, the anticipatory set creates the right kind of learning atmosphere, or workplace atmosphere that makes people want to learn, want to engage, and then give them a chance to fail and do it again and again.
Good.
Can I make one more point? Like our article also mentioned multitasking, we didn't write it up there, but it does say that it's your brain tricks you into thinking you can, but you really don't learn as effectively when you multitask. Because I say that, I bring that up because I always have a lot of creative students and they think they can multitask. They tend to want to do something else, but it doesn't always, isn't always effective.
Yeah, it's not going to stick.
Yeah.
You're really just toggling between two different tasks. And the problem is that you have to use some RAM to remember what the task was every time you go back, right? So that's really what's clogging you up. This wasn't in anything you read, but there's this other great idea that when you are fearful or stressed, your amygdala kind of locks up. That's the prehistoric part of your brain, locks up, and so a lot of your RAM is devoted to supporting that fear response. So you can't, and I'm using RAM in the computer term, but your random access memory, your ability to keep processing is locked up. So if you can help your students relax before tests or during stressful situations or yourself, it's going to help your access to information improve. Your retrieval will be improved if you can just chill out a little and help your students chill out. I mean, certainly there are moments when that little rush of energy and excitement is a good thing, but you don't.
It seems like a balancing act, like
Yes.
humor, right?
Yes. So let's look at the Willingham. You guys got 2 principles out of it, and let's maybe from the group we can come up with specific teaching or learning things we could do with students. So proficiency requires practice. How can we help our students with that? Yeah, homework, yes. And if you're gonna, how do you help students be inspired to do their homework? Yeah, if you grade it, right? If you give them feedback on the homework, that's gonna help them, right?
If you make them do group work, like activities, they feel pretty dumb when they haven't done the homework and can't do the activities. So kind of peer pressure as well from their peers.
Public shaming.
Yeah, a little bit of shame.
Yeah, that'll work.
Is our chart available to display also?
Sure, happy to pull that up. If you want to say a few words about it, thank you.
Like they're just looking for the people who can do a lot of them.
Oh, I know, I did work one this morning.
You did the Willingham, is that right? Yeah.
That's right.
This chart,
Yes, please.
so some of the groups got lucky with charts. Okay, so you want to tell us a little bit about your chart? Maybe pick one of the things that you talked about and then line us with your science.
So the topic was mostly on how to make students put more effort, and yeah, that was the topic of this one. So this is just a table where it is stated what the 9 principles.
Can I offer something that looks interesting that maybe we can talk about? 6, cognition is fundamentally different early and late in training. That's pretty interesting, right? Especially from our points of view, number 6 right here. So we come to our disciplines basically as experts, right? To get the PhD, you become an expert. And so then our expectations of what our students can do are clouded by how schooled we are in the discipline, right? So it's useful to remember that the ways we learn things are fundamentally different early and late. Oh yeah, right, that's okay. But I thought I was up there and I thought, well, it's a little bit different than what we've been talking about, so I wanted to put it out there because there's a whole other body of knowledge about this principle called threshold concepts, where you interrogate the parts of your discipline that are difficult for students. And how do you find out what's hard for your students? You ask them, right? Yes, you just ask them what was hard about this for you and why, so that you begin to build a database of, and because it's been so long since you learned it, you can't even remember what was hard for you anymore. And your whole concept of the world changes once you cross that threshold from practicing novice to expert. So, anyway.
We drew parallels between these 9 principles in the article and the 6 that we're working
Oh,
on.
nice.
And this chart is kind of handy because the right-hand column tells you how you can use it in the classroom.
So that is the Willingham, which you all have access to. We'll put the PowerPoint online, and I'll email it to you afterwards so you have access to it. Good. Okay, so in the last few minutes we have, I think it says we're going to 2 o'clock, but I'm shooting for 1:45. So, but no, go ahead and go. If you need to go, please don't wait. Okay. Okay, so lots of ideas. At the bottom of your handout, there's a couple of questions for you to think about. As you're leaving this space, it would be great if you could pull down 1 or 2 of the strategies we've talked about and think about how you can use them in your teaching. Some of them are kind of counterintuitive, right? So for instance, the effortful retrieval, memories improve with cognitive effort. That's counterintuitive in that a lot of us want to make it as easy as possible for our students to learn, which works in some ways, but not really in the cognitive realm. So sometimes when I'm with faculty and they have PowerPoints with blanks, so they're reading something and the students are supposed to write in the blank, they are exerting effort to write in the blank, right? But it's not, you want to keep thinking about how to challenge your students for that cognitive effort because it will help them remember it better. So that class then becomes not just this exercise that you're both going through, but rather the time when they actually learn and helping your students shift that conception. I think they learn on their own the night before a test. So if you can help them, if you can use cognitive tools to shift their perception that this is where we're learning right now in this moment, it can help them in the long run. So take just a second to. Okay, so for 30 seconds, let's do a debrief. 30 seconds. The question on the table is, we just learned about a bunch of different cognitive principles. Do you remember if anything we've done in the last hour and 15 minutes has anything to do with the cognitive principles? What did we do? We started with a question. Is teaching an art or a science? Right? sort of thinking about teaching metaphorically. Just so you know, metaphors enhance transfer, hemispheric integration, and retention. That comes from Sousa. Right? One of the things you guys talked about was trying to solve a problem before we have all the information, which is kind of what the whole interactive lit review was. I asked you to think about strategies for using cognitive science before you had really delved into cognitive science. Good. And we tried some elaboration at one point too, giving material new meaning by expressing it in your own words. So, all of these strategies you can use with your students too. Any parting questions?
Is there, do you recommend outside of this classroom learning about the cognitive techniques or any book or something?
Oh yeah, it's on the references. There's this recently re-released book called Make It Stick. The Brown and Roediger. Roediger is a psychologist. I guess he's been at it for like 40 years. It's a great book, and it's well written. The excerpt I gave the group who had it started with the story of a pilot. So there's lots of really interesting stories in that book, but also some practice. If we had more time and you all could look at each of the different ones, you'd see that the ways that people talk about cognitive science are wildly different. So there's some that talk about actual brain structures and what's happening in the brain, and there are others that just distill that down, and yet there's still more that are more narrative in their approach, which is pretty interesting. So I'll send you this PowerPoint so you have access to it. And maybe if there's extra handouts, you could take some of those too. Okay, any other questions? Thank you so much for being here. Have a